Well, you're still operating in heavenly places in Christ, whether you're fully functioning in that, you're still there. And therefore, where is your spirit receiving revelation? From that place.
Yes.
So if you're receiving insight, wisdom, revelation, then essentially that is what you then use in what you do. Now the difference is praying. The old model of praying assumed that you weren't really talking to God, or you weren't really heart to heart with him. You were praying and asking him to do something. That was the model. Intercession was, well, I'm standing in the gap between someone and God, asking God to bless them, or asking God to heal them, or asking God to do something. Whereas I don't do any of that, because as we mature in sonship, then we're there to outwork the Father's heart. Now, very occasionally, Jesus prayed and asked the Father to do something. I think John 17 was an example of that. Mm-hmm. But the majority of the time, it's just an inner relationship that Jesus had with the Father. The Father was outworking his desires through Jesus, who was completely only wanting to do what he saw the Father doing. So you don't see Jesus praying. Now, again, when we come to the Lord's Prayer and that thing, that was old covenant. It wasn't new covenant. It was what they understood in the old covenant. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It was, well, that's because they weren't in heaven. So they weren't doing any of the in heaven stuff. So they were praying that would happen. So again, I don't even think the Lord's Prayer is a new covenant prayer. Because it's all about doing something for something. And I think we've got to move away from praying a prayer to a God who's somewhere else, to being with that God and outworking the Father's desires through our sonship that he assigns and mandates us to do, which in some situations is nothing, and you've got no right to do anything. But there are spheres of authority we know we've been given that we do have a mandate to rule and to govern. Well, that's very different than praying that God would do something in our sphere. We have the authority to decree and to declare and to call forth the Father's desires within that sphere. So I can release blessing. I don't have to pray the Father blesses someone in my sphere. I can bless them in my sphere because it's my sphere of authority, that I'm blessing them with the Father's blessing, because it's all about outworking the Father's desires, heart, into people's lives. But I'm not, God, will you do this? God, can you do that? God, it's not a list that I have that I'm reminding God about. That's not how it works. So there is no warfare that's saying, okay, there's this opposition. I'm going to pray some sort of warfare prayers to destroy the opposition. And actually, a lot of the warfare prayers were more declarationary. A lot of them weren't, God, can you destroy our enemies? They were more about, well, we're going to bind and loose this or whatever, all the old models, but they were doing it in the negative. So, and more of the positive actually was what they were asking God to do, but the negative they thought they could do. And I would turn that around into, okay, there is some opposition to what God has shown me he wants to do. Therefore, I'm going to use the authority I have to stop that opposition happening. But then I'm going to look at how I can restore those who are opposing me, because they're acting like enemies, where I'm going to come in the opposite spirit and act like a friend. And I'm going to offer them restoration. And I'm not going to come to them and berail them or do any negative thing towards them. I use my authority to stop what they're doing, because they can't operate in my sphere if I'm using the authority I have in that sphere. It's only the authority that I allow them to have or give them that they can use. So I'm aware that I don't have to be passive and say, oh, well, I can't do anything. because I'm not going to oppose them. I am going to oppose what they're doing because it's contradictory to God's blessing within my sphere of authority. Now, there are people within my sphere of authority that have free will and choice. So if they're choosing to align with the enemy and to agree with the enemy and give the authority to the enemy in their lives, I can't stop that. I can challenge it, and I might be able to do some court case if there's a legal something going on, but those people still have to come into alignment and agreement with what God's is and not agree with the enemy, because as a man thinks, so is he. So if you agree with the enemy, your thinking is aligned to the enemy, so you're allowing the enemy to work in your life. And no matter how much principalities and powers you're going to bind and loose, you can't stop someone giving authority to the enemy if they choose to, or agreeing with the negative. But I can create an environment where that's less likely. So I can create an environment where God's love and God's blessing and joy and peace and rest are within my spheres, but people still have to choose to enter rest. In one sense, they're in rest because they're in Christ, but in one sense, you have to enter rest by choice. You can still choose to live in chaos. So when it comes to, well, how do I do that? It depends on the situation and circumstance and what's going on. I don't generally give any room in my thinking to the negative or the enemy. It's not, I'm not thinking about what the enemy's doing. I'm not even bothered with what the enemy's doing unless it actually impacts on what I'm doing or what God is doing. So then I will look at, okay, this is opposition. This is trying to stop what God's doing. I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen. And figuratively, you remove the authority the enemy has, and you limit that sphere that it can do it in. But you don't destroy it. You can't kill it. You can't kill a spiritual being. It's a spiritual being. So I don't do any of the, I'm going to chop off its head and do all that stuff. But I am figuratively removing its authority, which is its headship. I am removing its tail or the sphere that it moves in. I am figuratively getting back everything it's stolen or the opposition that's caused or the whatever it's done, because I'm going to exercise my authority in that area. But that does, you need to know your authority to be able to exercise it, and you need to know your identity to have any authority. So that's where really it starts. If we know who we are, we're very much more secure against any deception the enemy will try and bring. And usually that's what the enemy does. He tries to deceive me that he has authority in my life, or he has the ability to do something negative or oppose it. Where if I know I am, I know he hasn't. So to be honest, I don't have any enemy activity. Now, in the world, you can see enemy activity, but I don't have authority over the whole earth. I might be given authority over the whole earth for a specific thing, and then I'll use that authority in that specific area, and I'll deal with something with the mandate that I've been given for dealing with that. But generally, I can't say that I can just take authority over the whole earth in every situation, because some of that is outside of my sphere or my personal sphere. But I can be given authority at any time to deal with anything. But the way I deal with it is to identify what the tactics are, remove the authority because I'm bringing it into the light, and the enemy operates in darkness. So if I'm bringing something into the light, that removes the authority because that's no deception any longer. So I'm aware. If I'm aware, then I'm aware. Then there's no authority anymore because I'm aware of the situation, and I'm now in authority because I exercise that over the situation. Hi, everyone. We're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc. And we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.